She didn't cry. The tears had frozen before they even reached her cheekbones, clinging to her lashes like salt crystals. Her arms trembled under the weight of the baby, still slick with blood and barely breathing, wrapped in a worn coat she'd torn off her own back. Snow piled around her legs, soaking through the rough cotton of her skirt, seeping into her bones like ice water. But Eliza didn't move. Couldn't. Her mind kept skipping like a stone across the same few thoughts. He's gone. The baby's here, and I have nowhere to go. The wind howled across the open Wyoming plain, but the cry of her newborn, weak, almost too soft to be real, cut through it like a thread of hope. She looked down, fingers numb and lips cracked. The little thing was so small. His chest barely rose. She pulled him closer, whispering words she didn't remember forming. Her voice was hoarse from screaming earlier, when the pain had split her wide open on the frozen earth. There had been no midwife, no warm hands, just her, the wind, the snow, and God if he was listening. She had gone into labor behind the barn, not by choice. Her husband, Silas Boone, had told her she wasn't welcome in the house anymore. Not after what she'd said to him. Not after she'd finally stood up. He said she was ungrateful. Said she'd poisoned the well of his good name. Said no woman of his was going to shame him in front of the neighbors. And then, like he was throwing out something useless, he'd shoved her out the door in the middle of the snowstorm. That had been before her water broke. Now she was alone. The baby pressed her chest, blood dried on her thighs and down her boots. She didn't even know if it was a boy or a girl. She hadn't checked. She couldn't bring herself to look too long, afraid the baby might stop breathing any second. That if she blinked, it would be over. The world had gone still, cold. A strange kind of silence pressed in from all sides. Eliza's ears rang from the quiet, from the exhaustion. Her vision blurred. She tried not to close her eyes. Then came the sound of hooves. She didn't lift her head at first, thinking it was just her mind playing tricks. But the slow, careful clop of a single horse got louder, closer, until it stopped somewhere behind her. She smelled leather and old tobacco, heard the soft crunch of a man stepping down from his saddle. "Miss," a voice said. She turned her head, just slightly, squinting against the light snow. A tall figure stood a few yards off, shadowed by the low gray clouds, the brim of his hat wet with frost. He didn't move closer, just stood there quiet and watching. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said. His voice was low, gentle but not soft, like someone used to not being listened to. She didn't say anything. Couldn't. "I saw smoke back that way." The chimney. He nodded toward the house she could barely see in the distance. "Didn't figure anyone be out here. Then I heard the baby." She wanted to speak, wanted to ask who he was, but the words stuck in her throat like dry bread. He crouched down a little, keeping his distance. His coat was long, beat up, and his boots were crusted with snow. His face was weathered but kind, worn by years more than age. "Do you need help?" he asked. Still, she said nothing. He looked at the baby. "Is the child breathing?" She managed a nod. "Good," he said quietly. 4:06:14 p.m., January 27th, 2025, a long moment. They just looked at each other. Then, something changed in his eyes. He blinked slow, then straightened up just a bit. "I think I knew your husband." That word, husband, cut her deeper than the cold ever could. Her lips parted, and this time her voice came, raw and bitter. "He left us out here to die." The man didn't react like she thought he would. Didn't look shocked. Didn't scold. Just tilted his head, like that explained something to him. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eliza." He nodded. "Mine's Joel." She didn't recognize it, but something about the name made her feel less alone. Maybe it was the way he said it, like it didn't matter much to him if she remembered or not. "You said you knew Silas Boone," she murmured. He nodded once. "Years ago. Saved my life, back in Colorado. I was bleeding bad, out in the canyon. He found me and didn't ask questions. Hauled me back on his mule and sat by my fire until I was strong enough to walk again." Eliza swallowed hard. That didn't sound like the man she knew. Not the one who drank himself sick and barked orders like a dog. Not the one who made her flinch when he raised his voice. "You sure it was him?" she asked, a bitter edge in her voice. Joel didn't get defensive, just looked off into the trees. "I'm sure. People change," she said flatly. "They do," he agreed. Then, softer, sometimes for the worse. Her breath caught. For the first time in hours, her body gave in, just a little. She leaned to one side and winced. The baby stirred, a tiny fist pressing against her chest. Joel took a slow step forward. "You're bleeding," he said. "You can't stay out here." "I know. You got a place to go?" She shook her head, too tired to lie. He didn't move right away. Just looked at her like a man who understood what she hadn't said out loud. "About a wagon. There's blankets. A little stove. I'm headed west, toward Rock Springs. I can take you as far as you need." She looked down at the baby. His lips were blue. His breath came in tiny flutters. She bit her tongue until she tasted blood. "I can't leave him here," she whispered. "You won't have to." She closed her eyes. For a second, she imagined what it might feel like to be warm again, to sleep, to feed her baby and not have to listen for footsteps in the snow. But the fear was too strong. Silas Boone would come back. And if he found her gone, "He'll kill me," she said suddenly, her voice breaking. "If he find me with the baby, he already," she didn't finish. Didn't need to. Joel's jaw tightened. His eyes darkened, not with anger, but something colder. Steadier. Like a man who had seen this kind of thing before and decided a long time ago what to do about it. "I won't let him," he said. Eliza blinked up at him, barely able to breathe through the pain in her chest. "Let me help," he said again. "Just until you're strong." She hesitated. Every part of her wanted to run, to hide, but she couldn't even stand on her own. She looked at the baby, then back at Joel, and somehow, deep inside, she knew he meant it. "All right," she whispered. He didn't smile, just nodded once, slow and sure, then stepped forward and reached out his arms. She let him take the baby first. Watched how gently he held him, how he cradled the tiny body like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. Then, without a word, he wrapped her in a wool blanket and lifted her up into his arms. And for the first time in a long time, Eliza let herself believe there might be something waiting for her beyond the snow. The snow had long since stopped falling, but the sky stayed that same dull gray, like a sheet pulled over the sun. In the back of Joel's wagon, wrapped in thick wool blankets, Eliza lay half awake with the baby resting on her chest. The little one, a boy, she'd learned the next morning, had made it through the night. Barely. His breathing had steadied, and he suckled when she pressed into her breast, though it was clear she hadn't eaten properly in days. Joel hadn't said much since they'd left the farmstead behind, and Eliza hadn't asked where he was taking her. She didn't care. Anywhere but there. The wagon rocked gently as the mules plodded forward along a narrow dirt trail, lined with bare trees and crusted snow. Eliza flinched with every creak of the wheels. Her body still ached in places she didn't want to think about. The birth had torn her open. Silas Boone had torn something else, something deeper. The memories came in waves. The bruises, the shouting, the silences that followed. He wasn't always cruel. That was the hardest part. He could be gentle sometimes, especially in front of others. That kindness, it never lasted long. She closed her eyes and tried to focus on the steady rhythm of the baby's breaths. The baby, her son, she hadn't given him a name yet. Something about that felt too big, too permanent. Like naming him would mean she had to believe they had a future. "We'll stop up ahead," Joel called from the driver's seat. "There's a widow who keeps a boarding house near the fork. You can rest inside for a bit. Get cleaned up." Eliza didn't answer, but her heart gave a little jump. The idea of a warm room, a basin of clean water, a real bed, it sounded like a dream. The boarding house sat at the edge of a wooded hollow, a weathered two-story house with green shutters and a tin roof. Smoke drifted from the chimney, and the smell of something baking reached them before they even pulled into the yard. Joel jumped down first, helped Eliza climb out, and carried the baby while she hobbled up the porch steps. The door opened before they could knock. "Mr. Joel," said a sharp, no-nonsense voice. "You've brought trouble, haven't you?" The woman in the doorway was sturdy and short, with thick gray hair pulled into a knot at the back of her head and sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her face was kind, but her eyes were sharp. "This is Eliza," Joel said, his voice even. "She's just had a baby. Needs rest. Food." The woman's eyes flicked to Eliza, then to the bundle in Joel's arms. Her features softened just slightly. "Well, don't just stand there like a fool. Bring her in." Inside, the house was warm and smelled of yeast and coffee. A fire roared in the stove. Eliza nearly sank to her knees when the heat hit her face. "My name's Edna Hargrove," the woman said as she poured steaming water into a basin. "This used to be my husband's house, God rest him. Now it's mine, and I keep it clean, quiet, and without nonsense. You're welcome as long as you need." "Thank you," Eliza whispered, the words catching in her throat. Edna glanced at Joel. "You staying?" "No," he said. "I'll check back tomorrow." Edna gave a curt nod, then turned to Eliza. "Let's get that little one cleaned up and see about feeding you both." Later that night, Eliza sat on a cot near the stove, her boy sleeping peacefully in a cradle that Edna had pulled from the attic. Clean, warm, and fed for the first time in days, she felt like a person again, almost. But the peace didn't last. It never did. That evening, after supper, Edna sat beside her with a cup of tea. "I don't ask questions," she said gently. "But you should know, if there's someone dangerous looking for you, you're not the first woman to come through this house running from something." Eliza looked down at her hands. "It's my husband." Edna didn't flinch. "Of course it is." The older woman leaned back in her chair. "I've buried 2 men. The first died in the war. The second raised his fists one too many times. I've learned how to protect what's mine." Eliza's voice cracked. "I didn't know it'd be like that. When I married him, he was charming, polite, always made folks laugh. I thought he was the kind of man who'd gimme the world. They always do, until they've got your name on paper. I stayed too long. You stayed because you had hope. That's nothing to be ashamed of." Joel returned the next morning, true to his word. He brought food, cloth for the baby, and a quiet presence that settled the nerves in Eliza's belly. She watched him from the window, how he spoke softly to the mule as he fed it, how he moved with the calmness of someone who'd learned patience the hard way. When Edna left to tend to the henhouse, Eliza finally asked, "Why are you helping me?" Joel didn't look surprised. He sat down on the bench across from her and studied the sleeping baby. "I told you Silas Boone once saved me," he said. "That's part of it. But it's not the whole reason." She waited. "I lost someone. A long time ago. My wife, Elizabeth. We were trying to make a home out in Gunnison. She was strong, fierce, but the land was harder than we expected. Winters were long. Food was scarce. I left for supplies one December. When I came back, she was gone. The neighbor said she'd gone walking for firewood and never came back." Eliza swallowed hard. "You never found her?" "I found her scarf. That's all." The silence hung heavy between them. "You remind me of her," he said. "The way you held that baby in the snow. Like nothing else mattered. That kind of love, it stays with a man." Eliza looked away, unsure how to carry the weight of his words. "I'm not strong," she said quietly. "I stayed with a man who hated me. I let him hurt me. You didn't let him. He took it. There's a difference." She nodded slowly, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. "About a place," Joel said. "Small cabin up near Red Hill. Empty most of the year. I don't use it much anymore, but it's safe. No one goes up that way unless they're looking to get lost. You want me to go there? I want you to be somewhere he won't find you." Eliza didn't answer right away. Her hands trembled again, not from cold this time, but fear. Silas Boone might already be looking for her. Might be storming through towns with that loud voice of his, telling lies. Or worse, telling the truth in that slippery, twisted way he always had, making her seem like the villain. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "All right." That night, sleep didn't come easy. She lay on the cot, The baby curled beside her, and every creak of the house made her chest tighten. She thought about the look in Silas Boone's eyes the last time he'd hit her. Not anger, but something colder. Something that said he didn't care if she lived or died. That was when she'd stopped begging, when she started planning. The only thing she hadn't planned on was going into labor early, or being left out in the snow to do it alone. She reached down, brushed her fingers over her son's tiny fist. His skin was warm now, his cheeks full and pink. "You deserve better," she whispered to him. "I don't know how, but I'll find a way." Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Inside, Eliza lay still, thinking of Joel's cabin in Red Hill, of Edna's quiet strength, of the woman she used to be, and the one she might still become. Edna's boarding house sat nestled in the hollow like it had grown there, safe, quiet, surrounded by pine trees that whispered in the wind. For the first time in months, maybe longer, Eliza found herself breathing without flinching. The fear didn't vanish entirely. It still slept beneath her ribs, but it loosened its grip. Each morning brought a little more strength back in her body, and each night, her baby's cries reminded her that she hadn't given up when it would have been easier to die. She named him Eli. It came to her one morning while watching him sleep in the cradle, his tiny chest rising and falling like the rhythm of a prayer. It was simple, strong, and didn't belong to anyone from her past. Just his. His name alone. Joel came every other day. He never stayed long, just enough to bring supplies or check in. Sometimes he sat with Eli while Eliza washed clothes or napped in the sun. Other times they said very little, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It filled with unspoken things, gratitude, trust, a quiet kind of understanding. She didn't know much about him yet, but she knew this. He wasn't waiting for something from her. He didn't expect her to smile, or touch his arm, or offer thanks in any grand way. He just showed up, again and again. One morning, Eliza found him out by the woodshed, chopping firewood with easy, practiced swings. His coat hung off a nail, and steam rose from his shirt despite the cold. She stood on the porch, holding Eli close, and watched him for a moment before speaking. "You always this helpful?" she asked, voice dry. He glanced up, grinning just a little. "Only when someone needs it." She walked down the steps slowly, careful on the gravel path. "You've got a cabin, right? You said it's empty." He nodded. "What would I owe you to stay there?" Joel paused, set the axe down. "You don't owe me anything." "That's not how the world works," she said. He leaned against the chopping block. "Maybe not, but it's how I work." She studied his face, searching for strings, for hidden meanings. She found none, just that same steady calm he always carried. "I'm not someone who gets charity," she said. "I'm not offering charity," he replied. "I'm offering a safe place until you find your footing." "Why?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Because someone once did the same for me. I never paid him back either. He didn't ask me to." She looked down at Eli, who blinked up at her with cloudy blue eyes. "I don't want to live in fear," she said. "Not for me. Not for him." "Then come to the cabin," he said quietly. "It's time." They left 2 days later. Edna packed a basket of bread, jerky, and canned peaches, hugged Eliza tight, and whispered something she couldn't quite catch. Probably for the best. It would have made her cry. Joel hitched the wagon, helped Eliza up, then took the reins without fanfare. The journey took a full day, winding up rocky hills and past half-frozen creeks. As they climbed higher, the trees grew taller, thicker, until the forest swallowed the trail. The cabin was small but solid, log walls, a stone chimney, a porch with a crooked railing. Smoke still lingered in the fireplace from Joel's last visit, and the place smelled of cedar and earth. Inside were 2 rooms, a kitchen living space, and a bedroom with a narrow bed and a single window that let in the pale winter light. Eliza stood in the doorway, Eli tucked against her shoulder, and let the silence soak in. It wasn't cold or empty. It was peace. They spent the first few days settling in. Joel taught her how to light the stove without choking the place in smoke where to fetch water from the nearby stream, how to set traps along the tree line in case they ran low on meat. Eliza listened carefully, absorbing every word. She hadn't had the chance to learn much in her old life. Silas Boone had kept her busy with cooking, cleaning, smiling when company came. But here, she moved differently, with purpose. One morning, Eliza woke early to find Joel already up, cooking eggs over the fire. Eli was asleep in a basket near the hearth, swaddled in blankets. The smell of food made her stomach growl. "You didn't have to cook," she said, pulling her shawl around her. Joel shrugged. "I like early mornings." She sat across from him and warmed her hands by the flames. "It's quiet here. That's the point." They ate in silence, save for the crackling fire. Then Eliza spoke without thinking. "I didn't know men could be kind without wanting something." Joel didn't flinch. Most men aren't taught how. Silas Boone wasn't always a monster. He used to bring me flowers, told me stories about his father's ranch. I believed him. He probably believed it, too, until life asked more from him than charm. She nodded slowly. He hated being poor, hated seeing other men succeed. Took it out on me. "I've seen that before," Joel said. "A man who thinks he's owed something. When he doesn't get it, he finds someone smaller to blame." "That's what scared me the most," Eliza whispered. "Not the fists, not the shouting, but how much he truly believed I was the problem." Joel looked at her then, really looked, and his voice was quieter than before. "You weren't." In the days that followed, the snow melted little by little. The river near the cabin cracked open again, flowing fast and clear. Eliza spent afternoons carrying Eli in a sling as she walked the perimeter of the trees, learning the sound of different birds, watching for animal tracks in the mud. Joel showed her how to shoot. Not big guns, just a small pistol, enough to scare off predators if needed. Her hands shook the first time she fired, but he said nothing, only nodded and handed her another bullet. They began to laugh more. Over burned biscuits, over a raccoon stealing their soap. Once when Eli refused to sleep and screamed for an hour straight. They took turns holding him while pacing the porch. Eliza, near tears, finally sat down and whispered, "What if I mess him up?" "You won't," Joel said. "How do you know?" "Because you're asking the question." Still, not everything was easy. Eliza woke most nights from bad dreams. Silas Boone's voice, his boots in the hallway, the heavy slam of a door. Sometimes she'd sit by the fire with Eli asleep in her arms and stare at nothing, caught between memory and the sound of the wind. Joel never asked questions. He just joined her in the dark, silent as a shadow, and waited for her breathing to slow again. One night, a storm rolled in, loud and fast, lightning flashing over the ridge. Eli startled and began to cry, and Eliza, tired, frayed, half mad with anxiety, couldn't get him to calm down. She rocked him, hummed, whispered, but nothing helped. Her hands began to shake, the panic creeping in like it used to when Silas Boone would shout through the door. Joel walked in, saw her frozen in place, and stepped close. "Give him to me," he said gently. She did, and he took the baby, held him to his chest, whispering low and steady. Eliza sank to the floor and covered her face. "I can't do this," she muttered. "What if I ruin him too?" Joel looked down at her, then crouched beside her. "You won't," he said. "You've already done more than most women in your place ever get the chance to do." She met his eyes. "What place is that?" "The one where you don't die." Eliza didn't cry. Not then. But something inside her shifted, like the ground had finally stopped shaking. She leaned against the wall, watched Joel rock Eli back to sleep, and felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Not love. Not yet. But maybe hope. Maybe something close. As the days turned into weeks, a quiet rhythm formed. Mornings brought chores and feedings. Afternoons were spent gathering, preparing, surviving. And every night, after Eli was tucked in, Eliza would sit with Joel on the porch, watching the stars come out one by one. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. But each night, the space between them grew a little smaller. Not romantic, Not rushed. Just two people learning how to be unafraid again. Spring was coming. Eliza could feel it in the earth. And for the first time since the snow, she believed she might live to see it bloom. The early signs of spring brought a sense of false ease. Tiny green shoots began pushing through the frostbitten ground, and birdsong returned to the trees above the cabin. Eliza woke each morning to the sound of water running freely again and the occasional bark of a fox in the woods. It should have made her feel better, safer, but instead it left her uneasy. Winter had protected her, kept the world away with its sharp wind and deep snow. Now, with the road passable again, she knew anyone could come up that mountain, including the one man she feared most. Joel noticed the change before she admitted it. Eliza grew quiet, less focused. Her eyes flicked toward the window too often. She startled when a squirrel landed on the roof. Even Eli picked up on it, waking more often, fussing without cause. One morning, as she stood by the sink wringing out a cloth for his fever, Joel laid a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're not here with me," he said. She didn't turn. "What if he finds me?" Joel waited. "You said the town's not that far," she went on. "What if someone sees me when I go in for supplies? What if they mention it to him? What if Silas Boone's already looking?" "He probably is," Joel said quietly. "But that doesn't mean he'll find you." She finally turned, her eyes wet, jaw tight. He always did before. There was the thing she hadn't said out loud until now. Not to Edna, not even to herself. Joel didn't respond right away. Then he asked, "What would you do if he showed up tomorrow?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I don't know," she said finally. "You wouldn't run?" "No," she said after a long moment. "Not anymore." Joel nodded slowly, like he believed her. But he also knew, and she knew too, that not running didn't mean she wasn't afraid. That night, she dreamt of Silas Boone standing in the doorway with snow on his boots and blood on his hands. When she woke, her nightgown was damp with sweat and Eli was crying. Joel was already up, standing barefoot in the kitchen with a rifle in his hand, scanning the trees through the window. "You saw something?" she whispered, clutching the blanket around her. "Rabbit," he said, "but I'm keeping it loaded now, just in case." She hated how much that comforted her. Still, life pushed forward. Eli grew heavier, more alert. Eliza started working again, sewing simple clothes for trade, helping Joel patch his old gear. He offered to teach her to ride a horse, but the memory of being thrown from Silas Boone's saddle still clawed at her mind. She refused, gently at first, then sharper each time. Finally, one afternoon, Joel handed her the reins of his calmest mare and said simply, "She won't hurt you." "But I'll stop asking." Eliza took the reins in her hands and stood staring at the animal for a long time. She didn't get on, but she didn't let go either. That same week, Joel brought news back from town. A man had been there asking questions. Not by name, but by description. Tall, red hair, blue coat. "Looking for a woman with a baby," Joel said. Eliza felt her knees weaken. "He knows I'm alive. Or he thinks you might be. What did you say?" "That I hadn't seen anyone like that. That I don't talk to strangers." She sat down, silent. Joel crouched beside her. "He didn't follow me back. I made sure. What if he tries again? Then I'll be ready." "No, Joel," she said. Her voice cracked. "You can't get involved. He's dangerous. He's cold. He'll kill you and not blink." "I've seen worse men," he said. "You shouldn't have to risk your life for me." Joel looked at her for a long time before speaking. "Maybe not, but you matter to me, and that baby matters to me. That's all the reason I need." She wanted to argue, scream at him, cry, push him away, but her voice failed. Instead, she stood and walked outside, letting the door slam behind her. She walked down past the tree line until the wind numbed her cheeks and her legs burned. Only then did she sit, pulling her knees up to her chest, and sob quietly. That night, she left a note on the table. Just 3 lines. "Thank you for everything. I need to go before he finds us. Don't follow. But when she reached the foot of the mountain road, carrying Eli wrapped in a sling, Joel was already there, waiting beside his horse. He didn't say anything, just opened his coat and held out his arms. "I don't know where to go," she whispered. "Then don't leave." She stepped into him, and for the first time, let herself lean fully against another person. He held her and Eli between them until the sun slipped below the ridge. The next morning, Eliza sat on the porch with a cup of warm broth, watching the fog rise. Eli dozed in his cradle near her feet. Joel stepped out and handed her a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" He hesitated. "It's something I never wanted to share unless you needed it. But maybe it's time." She unfolded the paper slowly. It was a letter, faded, dated 4 years back. "Joel, you don't owe me anything, but I hope you remember what I told you that night, that the good we do is never wasted. Someone helped me once. Now it's your turn to help someone else. Not because they're perfect or innocent, but because they need it. God keep you. Jay." Carson Eliza's hands trembled. "You never told me. He was the man your husband nearly killed in Texas," Joel said. "Silas Boone left him for dead on the road. I found him, took care of him, got him to a doctor in time. He wrote me that from jail after he turned himself in. And he told you about me? He said you were just a girl. Said you tried to help. That you were crying the whole time Silas Boone beat him. Said you gave him water when Silas Boone was passed out drunk." Eliza clutched the letter to her chest. "He remembered me. He did. It was too much. The guilt, the weight, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, her life wasn't one long mistake. That someone had seen her and known she wasn't the villain in the story Silas Boone had written." Later that day, a wagon creaked up the trail. A stranger stepped down, thin, older, with a worn face and a lawman star on his coat. Eliza froze. Joel stepped in front of her as the man tipped his hat. "Name's Sheriff Hall. I've been tracking a man named Silas Boone Dobson. I was told you might have information." Eliza looked at Joel. He nodded. The sheriff wasn't pushy. He didn't ask too many questions. Just told them that Silas Boone had been seen 2 towns over, asking about her. He'd stolen a horse and was suspected in the beating of a farmhand who wouldn't talk. Eliza listened, every word driving a spike deeper into her chest. "What do you need from me?" she asked, her voice tight. "Just your statement. You give me that. We have enough to charge him if he shows up again." She nodded slowly. That night, she sat at the table and wrote it all down. Everything. From the moment she met Silas Boone at a revival meeting in Kansas, to the first bruise, to the screaming nights, to the cold snow where she gave birth alone. By the time she finished, her hand ached and her eyes were swollen. Joel read it silently, then folded it and placed it in a leather pouch for the sheriff. "You did the right thing," he said. Eliza didn't answer. She just went to Eli's cradle and sat beside it, staring at the boy whose life had forced her to finally choose her own. And as the fire crackled and the wind blew against the windows, Eliza realized she wasn't running anymore. She was standing, bruised, scarred, but standing. The day started quiet. The sun came up pale and gold over the ridge, the kind of soft light that promised warmth but hadn't quite reached the earth yet. Eliza was chopping kindling out back while Eli napped inside, and Joel had taken the mule down to check the traps near the stream. There was a breeze, bird song, and the smell of pine in the air. Nothing felt out of place until she heard the crunch of footsteps behind her. She turned slowly, axe still in her hand. And there he was, Silas Boone. He looked thinner, worn, with hollows beneath his cheekbones and wild eyes that hadn't seen peace in a long time. His red hair was longer, streaked with gray, and his coat, the same dark blue one, was ripped across the back. He held no gun, no rope, just a smirk she remembered too well. "Took me a while," he said, voice hoarse, "but I knew you'd end up somewhere soft." Eliza's breath caught, but she didn't move. The axe stayed at her side, the blade pressed lightly against her thigh. "You gonna run, Eliza?" he asked, stepping closer. "Leave the baby again? Or did you finally grow a spine?" Something inside her cracked. Not with fear, but fury. It rose in her like a wave, fast and sharp. She thought of the snow, the blood, the hours in the dark whispering to a baby she wasn't sure would live. The way he'd laughed when he threw her out. The way no one had looked twice. "You think you're something," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "Coming here like a wolf. But you're just a coward, Silas Boone. You always were." He flinched, just barely, but she saw it. "Careful," he muttered, glancing around. "Where's your hero?" Hunting rabbits." "He's not the one who needs to be afraid," she said. Silas Boone's mouth twisted. "You talk big for a woman who cried every time I raised my voice. And I should have screamed. I should have run. But I didn't. I stayed too long. And I let you turn me into something small. But not anymore." Silas Boone stepped closer. "You think he loves you? That mountain ghost? You think he's going to stay when he finds out who you really are?" She didn't answer. Her heart pounded. She could feel the sweat on her palms, her grip tightening on the axe. "I should have ended it back then," Silas Boone hissed. "But I was weak." "No," she said. "You were cruel." And then, before either of them moved, a voice behind Silas Boone called out, "That's far enough." Silas Boone turned. Joel stood at the edge of the clearing, rifle in hand, steady as stone. "You came," Silas Boone said, grinning. "Thought you'd be smarter than that." "I am," Joel replied. "Smarter than you." Silas Boone's gaze flicked between them. "So what now? You gonna shoot me in front of her? In front of your little family?" Eliza raised the axe, not in fear, but because she needed to feel something real in her hands. "You came here to scare me, to take something, but there's nothing here for you anymore." Silas Boone stared at her, eyes narrowing. "You were mine. I was never yours," she said, her voice steady now. "You just took what wasn't given." A pause stretched between them. The wind picked up. Somewhere in the trees, a hawk cried out. Silas Boone took a step forward, one too many. Joel's voice rang out, "Don't." But Silas Boone moved anyway, and the moment he lunged, Eliza reacted without thinking. She swung the axe sideways, not at his body. She wasn't trying to kill him, but at the ground in front of his feet, the blade landing with a deep thud that kicked up earth and bark. Silas Boone stumbled, caught off balance, and before he could recover, Joel closed the distance and knocked him to the ground. There was a scuffle, two bodies tangled, boots in the dirt, fists landing, but it was brief. Joel came out on top, holding Silas Boone down with one knee and the barrel of the rifle resting at the base of his skull. "You're done," Joel said, breathing hard. "You'll never touch her again." Silas Boone spat into the dirt. "She ain't worth the trouble." Joel didn't respond. He just looked at Eliza, waiting, and she nodded. "Let him rot," she said. 2 hours later, the sheriff arrived. They'd sent a rider down the mountain weeks earlier with a message, just in case Silas Boone showed. Sheriff Hall came with a deputy and iron cuffs. Silas Boone didn't speak a word as they dragged him into the wagon, but he stared at Eliza the whole time. She didn't look away. When they finally drove off, dust rising behind the wheels, Eliza felt her knees give out. She collapsed onto the porch steps, arms trembling, chest heaving. Joel knelt beside her. "You did it," he said softly. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I know, but I didn't run." He reached out and took her hand, placing it over his heart. "And you never will again." They sat like that until the sky went orange with evening light. Eli cried once from inside, but Eliza didn't rise immediately. She stayed, holding on to the moment. Later that night, after the baby was asleep, Joel brought out a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving since the war. They drank by the fire, neither saying much. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was calm, settled. "Tell me something true," she said suddenly. Joel glanced at her. "What do you mean? Something you've never told anyone." He stared into the flames for a while. Then he said, "I saw my brother die, right in front of me. I couldn't stop it, couldn't save him. He begged me not to leave him alone, and I didn't. I stayed there until he stopped breathing. But after that, I couldn't stay anywhere too long. Every place started to feel like his grave. Eliza reached across the space between them and touched his knee. "You don't have to run anymore." He looked at her, and for the first time, his eyes shimmered with tears. Neither of them said the word love. Not that night, but it hung in the air, quiet, patient, real. Spring turned to summer. Flowers bloomed along the hillside. Eliza began to ride, just a little at first, on Joel's calm air. Eli took his first steps beneath the pines, laughing as he stumbled toward the creek. One morning, Eliza stood in the cabin doorway, sunlight on her face, watching Joel mend a fence with Eli strapped to his back. She felt something shift inside her. A lightness. Not everything was fixed. There were still nights she woke up sweating, still memories that clung to her like mud. But they no longer ruled her. She was no longer afraid of who she had been, or who Silas Boone said she was, because now she knew the truth. She was a mother, she was a survivor, and she was free. The rain came one evening in late summer, soft and steady, brushing the roof like fingers on a drum. Eliza stood barefoot on the porch, holding Eli against her hip, watching as the drops turned the dusty earth into slick patches of dark clay. Behind her, the fire inside the cabin glowed low, the smell of coffee and wood smoke curling out into the damp air. Joel stepped outside and joined her without a word. He had a blanket draped around his shoulders and held it open toward her. She stepped into it, into him, and let him fold her and the baby close. They stood that way for a long time, just listening to the rain. "I used to be afraid of nights like this," she whispered. "When the house went quiet, and all I had was my thoughts. I'd lie awake, waiting to hear his boots on the floor." Joel didn't speak. He just rested his chin lightly against her hair, grounding her. "But not anymore," she said. "Now I hear the rain, and I think, this is mine. This life, it's mine again." She felt Joel nod. That night, after Eli had been tucked in, after the fire burned down to orange coals, Eliza didn't move to sleep in the small bed she'd been using. She simply turned from the firelight and met Joel's eyes. And in that quiet, unspoken way they'd grown used to, she crossed the room and took his hand. Their coming together wasn't rushed. There was no urgency, no hunger to forget the past. It was slow, warm, and still, the kind of union built not on escape but return. A coming home. Joel touched her like he was learning a language she'd almost forgotten how to speak, and she answered him with all the gentleness she'd once thought she'd lost. There was nothing perfect about it, but it was safe, honest, whole. Afterward, Eliza lay beside him, listening to the creak of the wind outside, the soft rustle of Eli in his cradle, and the steady, grounding rhythm of Joel breathing. She'd never shared a bed without fear tucked under the blanket, too. Until now. "I want to stay," she murmured. "You already have," he said. The days that followed were quiet. Eliza began sewing again, not out of necessity, but out of joy. She stitched new shirts for Joel, dresses for herself, and little trousers for Eli, who had begun toddling around the yard with arms out wide like he could catch the wind. Joel built a swing from an old rope and hung it from the maple near the garden. Eliza sat under it most evenings, Eli on her lap, the sun settling on her shoulders. The scars were still there, the kind you don't always see, but they didn't bleed anymore. One morning, a letter arrived by Ryder. Sheriff Hall had sent word. Silas Boone had been sentenced. 10 years in federal prison for attempted assault and prior crimes in 2 counties. Eliza read the letter once and set it in the fire without a word. She didn't need anything from that part of her life anymore. Not closure, not vengeance, just distance. "I thought I'd feel something," she said, watching the paper curl in the flame. "You do," Joel replied. "It's just not what you expected." She nodded. "I feel done." That fall, the 3 of them walked into town together. Eliza carried a basket of her sewing to trade. Joel went to the blacksmith to sharpen tools. Eli clutched a biscuit in one hand and a wooden toy in the other. People looked, not out of suspicion, but curiosity. Then someone smiled. Then another. Eliza caught herself smiling back. The general store clerk asked her name. Eliza Dobson, she said, then paused. And then, softly, just Eliza. They stayed through sunset, and as they walked home, Eliza reached for Joel's hand. I want to plant something, she said suddenly. A garden, maybe, or fruit trees. Something that grows. I'll dig the soil, he said. You choose the seeds. And that was how the new chapter began. Not with grand declarations, but with soft footsteps, quiet changes, and steady hands. They didn't rush to call it marriage. They didn't hang signs or write their names into any record books. But when winter came again, there were 2 chairs by the fire, 2 coats on the hook, 2 voices singing to a sleepy child in the dark. And for Eliza, that was more than enough. It was the life she'd once believed she would never deserve. And it was hers now.